can record on my end too if it helps share the.
We'll see. Learning all these new things.
I have to request permission from the meeting host to record.
Well,
So if you want me to.
I'm not the host.
I know, oh dear.
If you're recording, you go ahead, Kelly, if you can record. If you need me to send me a message or something and I'll.
Yep, it should be recording.
Okay.
We can get started. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Heather, are you introducing or did you?
I will gladly introduce it. We have everybody with us. So this is the special education PTO through Gates Chili, new and still being developed. And in our first meeting, parents got a chance to take a survey and identify some needs that they felt we could address. And one of those was transitioning. When students who have special education profiles graduate or exit academic arena, what's the next step and how does that how is that planned for and how do we prepare? So Sarah Robinson is going to be presenting tonight. She's the transition specialist of the district. That's unique in Gates because in most districts that's a position that's either contracted or not available. So we're going to make the best use of that gift and have Sarah walk us through some of the transition information tonight. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. All right. Hello. I'm happy to be here. I do have a PowerPoint. I will share my screen and get that going so that you can kind of see the information if you can look and you can hear me and whatever works. Let's see. There we go. Hopefully that's working for everybody. Let me know if something goes bonkers because technology.
Oh, great.
So I am the Gates Chili School District Transition Specialist. And so I just kind of started this with this because, you know, as this group kind of knows, this is sort of relevant. Like, who is Sarah Robinson? I am the District Transition Specialist. I have been at the high school since 2007 as a teacher, and now since 2013, I've been the transition specialist at the high school. This year was my first opportunity to expand that role and to start working on bringing transition services where necessary to students in middle school and elementary school. And we'll talk more about that and why an elementary school student or a middle school student might need to work with me and what kind of, you know, makes that decision and identifies that. I am also a Gates Chili graduate, a community member. I'm a parent of 2 Brasser Bears and 1 Brasser Bear in training. So you might see me around also. I'm everywhere. So the first thing that I just want to talk about is what is transition, because, you know, students go through a lot of transitions. Everybody goes through a lot of transitions in life. But when we're talking about a transition specialist, when we're talking about capital T transition in the IEP, that is referring to transitioning from the public school system into the adult world of post-secondary training and education, work, and daily living. And so we look at students' ability to participate in those things, the preparation they need to participate in those things when we are, you know, setting those goals and moving towards that. So that's really what I'm thinking about, is that transition out of the school system and into that adult life. So what does a transition specialist do? How do I, what is this full-time job that I am doing? Because I think that's the easiest way maybe to understand everything that's available through getting services through me, is to have a concept of like what I actually do. So I am working with students and families to make plans for after high school. I work one-on-one with students. I sometimes work with students in groups. I talk to families and parents. I meet with them one-on-one. I'm available to them to help them make those plans. I help students and families access supports and services that can assist them reaching their goals after high school. So there are a lot of agencies, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those later, that once public school kind of fades away and you age out or you get a diploma, public school is no longer available to students at a certain age, but there are agencies through the state of New York, funded through the state of New York and other avenues that are available. And so my job is to be aware of those and to help families connect with those. I also help students develop skills which will help them be successful in achieving goals for after high school. So I do have a teaching background. I started as a special education teacher. I've taught elementary, middle, and high school. I've kind of moved up and now I'm transitioning. And so I do bring that background into play and do lessons with students about how to develop those work skills. I do some of that and work with students in that capacity at times. But what does that mean? Because if you're like me, I think about jobs all day long. I think about what jobs our kids are going to go to. I think about, but it's always like, but what does that person really do at that job day to day, So I kind of want to talk about that a little more in depth. What it means is one of the first things I do is I work with the special education team at the high school. I work with the teachers, I work with the psychologists and all the support staff there. I train them as far as how to be transition focused because I think transition is always the point of education. I mean, we're educating them to reach those goals for after high school. But especially beginning of the year, a student turns 12, like the state and the IEP says, we need to be transition focused. So the people carrying out that IEP need to be transition focused and need to be thinking about what the student is going to be doing after they leave the public school system. So in that year that a student turns 12, part of the IEP process begins to be talking to students at minimum about career goals for after high school or job goals. And sometimes it's also training, independent living, those types of things too. Starting the year a student turns 15, transition is addressed in the IEP. And so I am training high school staff and middle school staff sometimes in how to address transition through the IEP. So all high school special ed teachers, middle school special ed teachers at some points are looking at and talking to students about what are their goals for education and training, employment, and independent living after high school, and making sure that the IEP is working towards that. And then, special ed teachers, it needs to be said, special ed teachers are having those conversations with students. And then what do they do with that conversation, right? Like, okay, we have the conversation, check. But my job is to really help make that meaningful. So special education teachers can have those conversations with the students, and then they are trained to think, how is the district addressing these students' needs around meeting those goals? And is there anything, some students are on kind of a predictable track, but are there services, additional services we haven't thought of? Is there, a specific thing that a student might need to reach a goal? What is their needs? How are we addressing those needs and making sure we're doing that? And in cases where it's not something that they've encountered before, or where we might need to think outside the box, or we might need to provide additional services or different services to help meet that student's goals, or help that student meet their goals, then they consult with me. And we think outside the box if we need to. We refer to outside services if we need to. We, make a plan. So I am that resource where beyond just like the special ed teacher, which I think happens sometimes in other places, not here, but where it's just like check the box, did the paperwork. No, like I am there to help make that plan come off the paper. So for some students, the primary concerns are educational and vocational. So for some students, we're referring to outside programming. We're referring to programming such as WMOCO through BOCES 2, where it's like career tech education. Sometimes I'm referring to work-based learning, which is a really strong program through BOCES 2, which puts students in a community-based work site with a job coach to learn, fundamental work skills, communication, problem solving, advocating, responsibility, on and on and on and on. So sometimes we're referring to those outside those BOCES programs to help students develop skills before they leave us. For some things, the concerns are educational, where it's like, okay, well, if you want to go to this college program, like what are you going to need to do? What academics do you need to be prepared for? How do we need to prepare you academically for that college program? And then really in that case, also making sure students are aware of their needs. And this is something I've tried to have trained our staff with more too, is having those conversations with kids. And I think we've come a long way. What are your needs based on your disability? How are you going to ask and advocate for those needs if you're going to a college or a post-secondary education where your IEP doesn't necessarily follow you, where you still have the right to request accommodations, but there's not an IEP teacher there to make sure you're getting your accommodations. When you have to do it yourself, how are you able to express that and explain? And so that's something else that we're doing at the high school level that I'm working with high school teachers to teach kids to do. I'm getting very dehydrated, hold on. So much talking. Okay, so for other students, we have to dive a little bit deeper. So there are sometimes with students, we need to look at daily living skills, navigating safely and appropriately around the community. For some students, they, based on their disability, they're not commensurate with their same age peers with those things. So then we have to build in programming. We are required to build in programming to meet those needs. And again, sometimes I collaborate with staff in certain programs. We have certain programs at the high school where we build that community experience and those lessons or those social skills lessons right into their programming. And I help collaborate to make, with that staff, to make those programs transition focused. And we have some awesome staff that does that. Sometimes it's referring to outside BOCES programs again, where sometimes we have some students that go 1.5 days a week to like the Daily Living House out in BOCES too. Activities of daily living, and is that necessary to send students out there to learn, how to be safe in a home and have those daily living independent skills? So we also, and it's 100% based on student need, based on what we're hearing from the family, what we're observing, how do we put a plan in place to move that student forward towards their goals. So that's a lot of the stuff that I do where I'm kind of behind the scenes. The kids know me. I'm in and out of classrooms a lot. I'm meeting with kids a lot to make plans for, what their day-to-day looks like in high school to build this programming in as needed, and I'm collaborating with staff. However, a big part of my job that I really, really enjoy, I also work directly with students and families. So when I become involved with a student depends on the individual needs of that student and also the parent and the student's interest or how they feel about what needs they have and what they want to access. And the exciting part of my job now is that for the first time I'm really not just focused on the needs of students in high school. If there are needs outside of school, if there are needs that need to be addressed at a younger age, like middle school and elementary school, through referring them to like an outside service that can help start to develop skills or meet needs, I can do that. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But by 12th grade, this is kind of fun. I make contact with every student with an IEP in the high school and their families. So I realized that like not too long ago that all of our students with IEPs, they're in this program, they're in that program, they're in consultant teacher services, they see this psychologist, they see this social work. I am the one that sees all of them. I'm kind of proud of that. I work with every single student with an IEP by the time they leave us. So they will know me, hopefully, whether they want to admit it or not. So I assist, I meet with them individually. I meet with kids individually in my office. I meet with parents on the phone and over Zoom right now, but hopefully one day, we'll get back to office visits if need be. And I assist with narrowing down choices after high school, with finding a path, with talking about what that path looks like, how it plays into their strengths and their needs, finding appropriate vocational programs or educational programs, answering questions about college or training programs, about like testing requirements, like admission requirements, figuring out application processes, figuring out how to get accommodations on an entrance exam. I do all of those things. I assist with finding accommodations, accessing accommodations after high school. How do you get accommodations from your college program or from your vocational program? And making sure that those things are linked before they leave us. And then also linking students with supports and services that can assist them outside of school. So there's some other agencies that I do link them with. One of those that I do a lot of business with, I am the liaison at the high school for Access VR, which is an acronym with a very long meaning. So Adult Career and Continuing Education Services, Vocational Rehabilitation. Access VR is the agency which assists adults with disabilities in reaching their employment goals. So finding and maintaining employment in the adult world. Individuals, what I do is I link students with the vocational counselor. There is a vocational counselor from Access VR they're assigned by school. So there's a particular vocational counselor assigned to work with students from Gates Chili High School. And so if students want to apply, I help them with the application process. We put together their application packet. I submit it to that vocational counselor, and then we all meet together to do the intake. That vocational counselor's job is to discuss with the student what their employment goal is, and then to build a path to reach that goal. And then say, what types of barriers are you experiencing? What can I refer you to? So some really cool things that Access VR has started doing within the last 3, 4, 5 years, where they've realized that, the more experience that a student has in high school around employment, it really helps those outcomes after high school. So they've done some cool things where kids can get paid internships through Access VR while still in high school. The vocational counselor can refer them to a paid internship. They can refer them to work readiness classes while they're still in high school that they can attend outside of school. They are now referring more to career exploration counselors who sit and do intensive, not all at once, but 6 hours of sessions with kids to talk about employment paths and do interest inventories and skill inventories, and then help set goals and talk about the difference between different paths and really dive deep into developing that employment goal. They also assist with college. They assist with training programs after high school. They can assist financially. They can assist with tutoring. They've started a cool program recently where they have mentors that they can be referred to on the college campus that can help students kind of acclimate to college. So a lot of different programs through Access VR. So again, that counselor's job is to set the goal and then to help figure out what the barriers are to that goal, and then refer to programs that will overcome those barriers. And my job is to know my students really well so that I can ask the right questions of the Access VR counselor on their behalf and kind of connect between that student and what the students really like and what I know that Access VR offers, and kind of bring those things together. So that is my job, is to kind of be the expert on the student, be the expert on the Access VR, and to kind of help those two connect. Because sometimes otherwise, you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what services you're not getting because you don't know that they exist. So I really try hard to get to know kids so that I can get them in the right place. That program, Access VR, that agency, students can be linked starting within 2 years of exiting public school. So if a student is graduating in 12th grade, then I can link them beginning in 11th grade, and they can work with the Access VR counselor in some of those services. Again, the internship, the career exploration, those types of things. They can do that starting in 11th grade, work with the Access VR counselor through 12th grade. And then as school fades away, the Access VR counselor continues to work with that student and hopefully at that point they have a good understanding and a good relationship with, continues to work with that student until they are full-time employed for 90 days at least. For a student that is going to a transition program after high school and aging out at 21, say, Access VR can be referred, in there with 2 years of transition left, in that age of around 19. That year in which they're 19, they can be referred to Access VR and start that planning process. All right, one of the other agencies that I refer to can be referred to for kids starting when they are, starting at birth. And that is services through the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. That agency serves people with developmental disabilities who have significant adaptive skill deficits also. And I can answer questions about that if people have it, but essentially it's people with a diagnosed developmental disability from a list of developmental disabilities that the state has identified as being eligible. They provide services for individuals of all ages. Again, can start at birth, go through the lifespan, and they help with a wide range of needs, totally not limited at all, but some of them, you know, assistive technology, respite, community rehabilitation, that starts around the age of 13, where they can connect with a worker who will help them learn to navigate in the community and work on some of those independent living skills, recreation, and more. Again, that is not an exhaustive list, but it is a sampling. And if there's needs, you know, that a family has around a child disability, developmental disability, it's good to look into potentially connecting with OPWDD to help start to get those services so that the family can meet those needs. And I can't say enough in this presentation, I'm going to say it multiple times, I'm so excited to be able to start working with middle school and elementary school on connecting students with developmental disabilities with services. So that is the main agency that I would connect families with at that young age. That is pretty much it, but just to summarize, my most important job is listening to students and families discuss their goals, their concerns, their questions, and really everything I do is super individualized. It makes it hard for me to do a presentation like this because really the way I like to do my job is to listen first, and to listen to what a family needs and to what a family wants and what a student wants and what their goals are and help them build their path. And my job is to refer, you know, to what I know is out there and to, again, kind of bring that together. And so that is kind of the main summary. I will end with my contact information because I do enjoy, you know, again, it's all in the conversation. The conversation starts it. So I am open to taking phone calls, emails, cold calls, like talk to your school staff about me, call me on your own, whichever, however, I'm happy to talk to everybody about, you know, how I could potentially help their children now or down the road. And that is what I have. How about that?
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you. That was really great.
There's a lot of talking.
It's okay. It was in a capsule, though. It's nice. It puts it all together in one spot, and we know. And I do have a question.
For sure. I'm trying to unshare my screen, so 1 second. There we go. So I can see everybody again. There we go.
I'm trying to figure out which hat I have on in this question.
No problem.
Do you have specific transition goals? Is that would that be separate on the IEP, or are those interwoven into speech or special ed or OT wherever they would fit as per, you know, the goal itself?
Awesome question. So in the IEP, starting the year in which a student turns 15, at minimum, there's a section of the IEP called post-secondary goals.
Yep.
And so so those goals, you know, we have our annual goals, but then the post-secondary goals are like a new set of goals that just appear at 15.
Okay.
So we spell out, the IEP teacher, when they're writing that IEP, spells out what the student's employment or training goal is after high school, what their, education or training goal, employment goal, and independent daily living goal is for after high school. And those are spelled out, but they're not like an annual goal where you're like meeting a percentage or measuring. It's just that goal is there so everybody knows what we're aiming for.
Okay.
And then there's also a section that's called the coordinated set of activities, which is sort of your coordinated set of transition activities, which is sort of your planning, again, to meet those goals. So what is the district doing? And that should be a thread that goes through, right? So these are our goals. The coordinated set is what is the district doing to meet those goals.
Okay.
And then really, honestly, the annual goals should be moving towards those post-secondary goals also, right? There's no reason to have an annual goal that's not moving towards a transition goal. Again, my
Right.
coworkers love me.
Supporting the whole
Transition is the purpose of everything.
Right, right. It is.
Yep. So I don't know what hat that was, but that was a fun question, Heather. Thank you.
Sure. That was both hats, a speech and a possible parent hat. What could parents be wondering?
So this might be a silly question, but when does transition over? Like when is a student officially released, if that makes sense?
Oh, well, that's so so there's transition from the school district, right? So and my role is done with the student when they leave the school district. However, transition services through like Access VR and OPWDD, they've become really focused in recent years on, transitional age youth. And so that tends to be depending on what agency in the government you're dealing with, and I think it can be a little bit flexible, but it's really transition age youth is like 16 to 24 or 26 in there. So like OPWDD has people that work specifically, on transition age youth, like transition age services. Access VR has transition services, and those people are usually looking at that age range. But again, I don't know that that's hard and fast, because I think that there are people that transition out of a certain level of service, especially I'm thinking like OPWDD, where they might be transitioning into an employment setting older, right? And I think that those services are still there, but
It's
that's
best
just
to see it on a continuum, don't you think?
exactly.
Best to look at it on a continuum.
Exactly. Yep. And again, it depends agency to agency. Like Access VR considers you transition age, like they're going to support you in supported employment until 25, no matter what. And after that, you can keep getting those services, but there's a justification involved. But it doesn't mean that the services aren't there anymore. It's just not assumed, basically.
That's really helpful. That's fascinating too, because my only experience so far with transitions or capital lowercase, I guess lowercase, would be from EI.
Right.
Preschool.
So
You're
EI
right.
has a hard, fast 3, you're done. So you
Right.
need to be done and transition. It's very timed, and
But
that needs to be underway.
Tina, that's a transition from systems of support service. It's different. It's a
That's
different
another different
field.
T.
It's a
How many
different
T's?
field. Yup. This is transition, meaning like, out of school jobs as discussed. What you're referring to is a transition, and it is a changing kind of the systems, but it's a transition of delegated. It's almost based on funding, but
Right.
Mr. DeJong's going to yell at me. It's you're going from EI where the county oversees to 3 to 5 where the district oversees. So you're
Well, the county still
transitioning a
does
system,
with
not
preschool,
necessarily service. Yep.
And the services that I'm transitioning kids to do basically, like OPWDD goes all the way through, but like Access VR is from out of school through the lifespan. So you're no longer, like little kids in school, you're shifting from EI to, school age and preschool services, and then to this, and then, there's a lot of transitions and a lot of different agencies in those first however many years of a kid's life. But then those adult services are more like to do the lifespan. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, my
Awesome.
question. Can you be accessing OPWDD services as well as Access VR at the same time?
Yes. So that's a short yes. But yeah, and I definitely, and with kids that I have that have OPWDD, there's an assessment that happens to say, like, are you ready for, because Access VR is more working towards independent work. So are you ready for, supported employment or more independent? Like, how much need do you need? But once they determine, like, yes, you are within the range of need that Access VR can assist you, I try to get OPWDD and Access VR to the table together. Like I was just talking about that today with the family, because there are some services that OPWDD can bring, because Access VR is only going to do employment, and you would never want that independent living services and all of those to go away, and nobody would want that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then is there any benefit when they reach that age to have self-direction for transition? Is that like, you know, we switched, that was a huge push a few years ago for the young kids, do self-direction, it was kind of new. Is that a good thing to continue on?
I'm going to tell you, I feel like that's controversial. I think that that's you have to ask questions of your care manager. It's going to be specific to your family's needs, and what exactly you're accessing through self-direction, and how actively, right, you're going to be willing to continue, because self-direction it's a wider range of, like, I think it gives you a lot of freedom in how you appropriate those funds, right? But also it puts a lot of responsibility on the family to make those decisions. So if that continues to work for you, you know, I think you just have to look at the positives and negatives. I don't think it's going to be one answer for every single family.
All right, great.
What is self-direction?
So, so through OPWDD, it used to be, sorry, Kelly's like, because that's a huge, like, so much. So for OPWDD, the short answer is it used to be very much programs. Like, your child needs a recreation program, they go to this program, they go to this respite program, and that type of thing. About 7 years ago now, I want to say, they started this whole thing, self-direction, where instead of like sign your kid up for this program and that program and that program to meet needs, they can give you a budget. And so then the family can hire, can hire a worker, or can spend some of that budget on, you know, this class, or this, you know, YMCA membership, or this, you know, whichever. And they can spend their budget kind of as they see fit, and they have some more freedom. However, also, then you need to be on top of your budget. You need to be, you know, I just talked to a parent who is having to hire they're hiring their own staff, which is great because you're hiring your own staff, but also you got to hire your own staff. So, you know,
Accountability.
again, it 100% has to do with what the family's resources and, you know, where they're at.
I think you had mentioned an IEP doesn't follow you after school.
Right.
A 504 does, or how does that work? Or
Yeah,
no?
I'm glad. That is an awesome question, because that, I feel like, is something that gets confused, where the adult world and the school world are using the same language to mean different things. So, which is really helpful, really. Like, I'm so glad they
Semantics
do
always.
that.
Oh.
So, Section 504 is the section of law that protects people with disabilities, and says that they need to be given reasonable accommodations. And so Section 504 of the law covers people with disabilities in employment, in a college setting, in a training setting, you know, anything like that, on a civil service exam. Section 504 of the law covers them. In school, we then take that and turn that into, and just call it like a 504 plan, because it's a plan that we put in place because of Section 504. But that's a very specific document, right? There's a meeting, they write a specific document, and that doesn't necessarily have to be followed by the adult world. Same as an IEP. So you have, you know, the school determines what accommodations are necessary, you know, or the school team determines what accommodations are necessary for a student in school and places those on a 504 or on an IEP, depending, you know, on which document is appropriate. And that protects that child, and that child is entitled to that in school. When they leave and go to a college, or a college setting or an employment setting, that individual then needs to request, they don't need that paperwork, right? They don't need that paperwork from school. They need documentation of a disability. So that can come from, you know, an evaluation from school, or it could come from an outside doctor. But they're going to need documentation of a disability, and they're going to need to be able to verbalize, this is how my disability impacts me, and these are the accommodations I am requesting. And you don't need to have that on a specific document. You just have to have documentation that says, this is my disability, And then you need to be able to justify that, right? And justify requesting that accommodation. And then there's a whole legal thing that comes into play as far as, you know, and most colleges that I've dealt with are more than happy to help accommodate students with disabilities. If they come in with an IEP or a 504 plan and just say, like, I have this worked for me in high school, most colleges that I've come across, especially in this area, try to work with those students to get those accommodations. But it can get sticky legally. My brother happens to be an employment attorney, so like I just see this side of it too, where, you know, if you're requesting it of an employer, then the employer has to, like, what's a reasonable accommodation can become like a legal conversation. And so just because the school district writes it, though, that's the main message. Just because the school district writes it doesn't mean anybody has to follow it after they leave us. But
and when you say by you need to be able to say what you mean, the student needs to be able to,
the individual.
Oh,
Yes.
the individual. Okay.
The individual with the
right.
disability or
Okay.
their advocate, but the individual with the disability ideally needs to be able to say, this is my disability, this is how it impacts me, this is the accommodation I need.
And I think you had mentioned, so self advocacy is something that you focus on at the high school level.
Yep.
Is that at any at all in the middle school or the elementary, or is there any whisper about maybe that happening? Or
so I'm super new to working with the middle school and the elementary staff, but I, you know, like ideally someday I would love to talk to them about what's happening there. I don't doubt that they are doing that, but maybe Jason can speak more because he sees the whole range. But
yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. I think, you know, one of the things that we're working on as a district is really self-determination. And, you know, to Sarah's point, by the time that they're getting ready to exit, that students are able, and we're not there yet, but it's a work in progress, that students are able to run their own 504 or CSE meetings. You know, so they're able to talk specifically about those things that are working for them and those things that are not working for them, so that when they go on to college or a career, they're able to do exactly what Sarah was talking about. And all students may not be there at the time that they transition out of school, but that's our goal. And so you're right, Tina, that needs to make its way down to the middle school and even into the elementary schools. And that really starts with having conversations about kids starting in middle school and maybe earlier if appropriate about their disability and how that impacts them. Because, you know, there's a lot of kids that get to high school that don't even know that they have an IEP or what an IEP is or that they have a disability. Some parents are reluctant to talk about that with kids, and so we need to respect that. But there is a certain tipping point too, where we need to say, in order to be successful beyond the school walls, you have to be armed with this information so that you can advocate best for yourself. So, you know, having those conversations in the middle school about what an IEP is and the parts of an IEP. So when Sarah's talking about age 12 and you're starting to gain information about kids' interests and what they want to do potentially for a career, that's part of where kind of organically you have those conversations about the IEP process, what's working for them, what's not working for them, to make them aware. And I think the other thing that I wanted to add to what Sarah was saying was that, you know, she's absolutely right that it's not a hard and fast rule that a job or a college necessarily is going to implement the accommodations that are on either 504 IEP. But the part I wanted to make clear was that we really are talking about those accommodations, modifications. We're not talking about, obviously, programs, because, you know, those things are not transitioning to, you know, you're not going to go to college, or it's very, very rare, and you're going to get consultant teacher services or, you know, integrated co-teaching services or something like that. You really are focusing on those accommodations and potentially modifications.
Right. but I do want to piggyback and say, I think we are headed the right direction. Like when I started this job, I'm very purposeful about using the words IEP, and it's an IEP for a disability with my students. And, and I see the majority of kids I see is in 11th and 12th grade. And there was a time where that was like shocking to them. And I think students are getting more used to that language because they're hearing it at minimum in 9th grade, but I think probably my suspicion is probably middle school and that type of thing too. And in my experience, some of the kids that are really like impressive self-advocates are ones that have been using that language for a really long time. So I don't think you can start, I'm not going to say you can't start too early, but I think there are age appropriate ways to discuss that at every level.
I think, not to start controversy, but every child should know how they learn and what they need in a classroom. Because just because it deviates from the norm enough to be considered, on a bell curve or in an IEP, doesn't mean it has its own set of strategies. But any kid should know, what's my learning profile? What's my learning style? What do I need to get to the next goal? What goals are appropriate for me in school? Do I aim for honor roll or high honor roll, or do I just want to get my organization skills honed in this quarter? Like, every kid needs that. It's just to a different degree within the special education profiles. I start in 3rd grade. But in speech with the little kids, we don't talk about it in terms of your whole brain or how you learn or what name of your disability, but we do talk about it in terms of, I think your brain needs you to do this. And we literally talk about metacognition, metalinguistics, about how you learn and how you think.
Yep.
Super helpful.
Yep.
Sarah, I have a question about Access VR. You had mentioned that it's related specifically to employability or following through with employability. You said something about 90 days after they are employed, they're supported through Access VR. If at that point, 86 days, something happens, can they always go back to access more services? And is it also through the lifespan, or is it just specifically until they get initially employed?
Awesome question. So it is at 90 days successfully employed, they will close the case. If at 86 days successfully employed, something happens, you go back to the drawing board, right? And the only thing that's going to happen is if you're 90 days successfully employed, close the case, and at 95 days something happens, it's just more paperwork to get back on. You just have to restart the case, but that service, that agency is available to people with disabilities through the lifespan for as long as they are interested in working. It's just a little bit more paperwork to get restarted once you've been closed, but it's not even that bad.
It's nice to know that there's a support that follows through, even into adulthood and further past that initial phase of employment. So that's really great to hear.
Yes. But as with all adult services, it is about advocating and is about, so I've had kids that, have an Access VR counselor and then fall out of contact, and then 5 years later are in need and call me, and it's like, remember that counselor? Remember the lady? Call the lady. Because it is, but that support is always there. It's just, but we do a lot of training to remember, like, when you get stuck, who are your services to, like, what are your resources to call in the adult world?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's some ways that you can start to like talk to your kid about transition, like even at an early age. Like, how do you start planting that seed? If this is something that we're always working towards, elementary, middle, I don't know, just wondered if you had any suggestions for that.
Yep. So, I think a lot of what you do with kids with disabilities or with not disabilities is similar in that, especially when they're young, in that you're building an awareness that people work, an awareness that there are lots of types of jobs out there, and an awareness that there are different paths to get to those jobs, right? Like in my house, my kids are little and we're talking about, like if you want this or this job, like that's a lot of years of college. Whereas, these other jobs, you might go to a training program, or these other jobs you might not need, and like how you prepare for different types of jobs. And then we're talking about well, you'll have to see if you feel like going through that much college. I do a lot of, I particularly because of the work that I do a lot with my own kids and with all kids of not stigmatizing not going to college, not stigmatizing certain types of careers. I think that there's a big problem with that. Not stigmatizing that, WMOCO's for a certain type of kid, or that, certain types of kids go to work right after high school. And I think that that's important, that those messages start young. As far as, you should be job focused. It shouldn't be, you're going to go to college focused. It should be, what is the job that you want to get to go, and then what path you need to get there. And so I think when you're talking about jobs, that's a really good way to do that. And piggybacking, I don't think I could say it any better than Heather did, as far as also talking about, what type of learner are you? So does this type of learning style sit in the desk, let it come at you? Does that work for you? Are you more hands-on? What kind of technology can you use to make things easier? Your awareness as a learner plays into that into building those transition skills. And a million more things, because again, I feel like everything I do with my students and with my own kids there's always some sort of transition focus. I'm a real pleasure as a mother to live with, let me tell you.
You're out of here. You're out of here.
I've definitely fired my kids for making pancakes. So use a lot of employment language in my house.
Do not play the game of life in the Robinson household.
Nope.
She scrutinizes every career card before she lets them choose.
Well, you can have any career. You just need to know what's their pathway and what's realistic. And there are consequences.
So you had mentioned that you work with students and their families, but sometimes you work in groups of students.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that entail?
So I go into pretty much every self-contained program. So at the high school, we have 12-1-1, 15-1, 8-1, and then 15-1 CASP. And depending on the program, like our 12-1-1, I'm in there twice a month. Our 15-1, I try to be in there about 4 times a year, more with the older kids, and I'm doing lessons, and then the 8-1-1 and the 15-1 CASP, I try to go in and do at least a unit with their teacher during the year. So I'm going in there and doing lessons on work skills. Depending on the kids, some of those programs I'm writing resumes and we're doing mock interviews. Some of those programs we are doing a lot of role play and developing what they used to call soft skills for employment, which now some people don't like that term, but so I'm going in and doing those types of lessons. And that is a double, it's an in-your-face, I'm teaching these kids these skills, but I also have like a sneaky purpose where I'm also going in and evaluating the kids and seeing like what types of deficits do I see, what types of needs do I see, building a rapport with them so that when I do pull them into 11th and 12th grade and want to talk about their disability, they're not like, who is this lady and where did she come from? So there's a lot of purposes. So I'm in classrooms a lot, which I'm thankful for. Having the teaching background, I think I would miss it if I wasn't.
And I can give you a plug to that because I was just in this week to see Sarah in the 12-1 classroom. Did an excellent job doing role plays of making calls. How do you make calls? To a different variety of scenarios. You're going to call a pizza place. You're going to call your employer and say that you're not going to be able to come in, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and was really a great lesson. Tied in their own personal information that they need to know, address, phone number, those types of things, vital skills that they'll need to know, obviously, after they get done with school, but also, you know, really putting them in the mode of making those phone calls, and how do you do that? And in the level of stress was there, you know, there's just a little bit of stress when you're calling somebody on the phone, and you know they're asking you for a bunch of different information right on the spot. And the kids handled it very well, but you could tell that it was like a real life learning opportunity for them. So it was really good. It was really good to see.
Yep. And hopefully in the post-COVID world, we can also go back with that same group. There's a couple different groups that we try to get out in the community. So I do field trips and things where we try to go out and, you know, order food or find different, like, identify different things in a mall, and we do like big safety lessons on being in public and those types of things. So hoping to get back to that. Right now we're doing a lot more role playing, but.
And so if you had a kiddo that's, you know, maybe not going to be your typical employed individual, what types of things would you work on with that kiddo? Or, you know, what are the other options?
As far as, so we're always, employment's like a spectrum too, right? Because there's certain things, there's more basic employment skills and there's more advanced employment skills. And you're always kind of working along that spectrum and meeting those kids where they are. So there are certain things like following directions, finishing a task to its end, you know, like doing a multi-step direction. Those types of things, and I could go on and on, communicating when you're confused. Those types of things are all employment skills. And, you know, whether or not you're ever going to make it to independent employment, you're still working on that spectrum. You're still working on that trajectory. And so we just start there.
I love that answer. Yeah.
All right.
Anyone else with questions? Sarah, this was really great. Thank you so much.
I love my job. I love talking about my job. I'm not going to lie. So anytime.
You can tell. You really can. I love it.
Tammy and Jamie, do they feel included? Do you guys have any questions, or
I was just about to cut in.
chat box you can?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I was just wondering how often, so I know you talked about writing in those transitional skills on an IEP, how often is that kind of reviewed and assessed and maybe changed on an IEP? Like, I know, you know, kids are going to change their minds constantly. I want to be a marine biologist this day and an author this day. So there's some degree of you can't change it, but then there's also some degree of they took a vocational class and it clicked with them and they enjoyed it. So how often is that actually reviewed and changed?
So it's done annually with the IEP, is when there's something called a level 1 assessment, which is actually that there's a formal piece of paperwork that the IEP teacher is sitting down with the student and asking questions and making sure that they're going through all of kind of the complicated parts that I kind of talked about picking a job. Like, not only what are you interested in, but like how much training does that involve, and like how do all those things fit together. So that's happening once a year usually, but we would never, like, if a kid, because kids are kids, and that whole process identifies that, right? So if we had a kid who's going to be a chef and is signed up at the high school for Culinary 1 and Culinary 2 for 10th grade, and then suddenly decides that they hate culinary, we're not going to say, well, you have to finish Culinary 2 because that's in your IEP, you know. Or I've had kids that go to WMOCO and last 3 days in cosmetology and are like, I didn't realize I had to touch people. Like, we're not going to be like, no, you can't, it's in your IEP. So we usually don't adjust that paperwork. We just adjust the plan and then make sure that that paperwork gets adjusted, you know, when the next IEP comes up. But
Okay, that's clear.
there's some flexibility because kids are kids, for sure.
Thank you for having this. It's very helpful.
Good.
I always wonder what happens to people in the world forget that our special needs kids grow up to be special needs as adults, and all the supports aren't out there like they are for kids. And we're constantly asking our special needs kids to accommodate, you know, to make adjustments for themselves to fit in with the rest of the world. But nowhere out there is there ever training really for the rest of the world to understand special needs kids. No, you know what I mean? Like no one ever, like at what point do we teach our regular people, you know, you don't need to stare at a special needs kid or think they're funny like a lot of them do, or just stuff like that. But maybe I think sometimes in the world, like us as regular people need to be trained in how to deal with special needs community.
I agree. I hope we're getting there. I hope it's getting better, but I agree.
And so my kids, my son's sisters always told their other kids when they were younger, because my son's autistic, that Christopher's brain is just wired different. It's so funny. So kind of plugged into a different outlet than the rest of us.
One way that we're doing, hi, Ms. Kyler, it's Mr. Mattias. It's nice to see you again. How are you doing? One way we do address just globally kind of like differences in learning and learning styles and learning abilities is I'm working with a lot of kids throughout second grade through fifth grade, going in to do some reading about autism specifically, and exposing kids to just different learning styles and strengths within the autism community. So I do think it starts early, and I do think you're right, Mrs. Kyler, we do need to do more work globally, societally, addressing how do we respond, appreciate, respect, and advocate for people with exceptional learning abilities. So just so you know, we're starting to do a lot of that work younger and younger nowadays, and kind of getting folks to really appreciate their special ed counterparts and peers, and trying to include them as much as possible in every single activity that their peers are in. So we are still trying to reach for, advocate for, and encourage peers to really understand that learning differences can be something to be celebrated and encouraged and just accepted. So we're doing a lot of work there too. It isn't as fast as I would like it to be, but you know, we're starting and making some really big inroads, I think.
Cool.
And to that point, Adam, I think I'll add, you know, like a kudos to the district as a whole, and the trajectory that we're on is, you know, we're trying very hard to bring as many students back to our own district as possible in our own programs. And I think that not only is a great advantage for students with disabilities, but also our general education students as well, as they have opportunities to interact with each other, and you know, this growing understanding from both sides is a wonderful thing, rather than having our students with disabilities, you know, oh, you know, you have a classification of this or that, that means you're going to a BOCES program, or you're going to this program. You know, the more that we can, you know, I'm a big advocate for keeping our students in our own district, because I think we can serve them best. You know, and hence why we have, you know, Adam, and you know, as a specialist, or Chastity as a specialist, or Sarah as a specialist in our own district, rather than outsourcing that to BOCES. But I think there's some, as you guys know, that depends on both sides for our general education students and our students with disabilities.
Are we ready to wrap up? Everybody had a chance to ask questions. This has been recorded, and I believe that will be available, right, Tina, via a link?
Well, I'll talk with Kelly and we'll see what we can do to figure that out.
Yeah.
So that will be forthcoming, probably through the SEPTO Facebook page, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we will mess around with it and
We'll figure something out. Sarah, thank you again so much.
Yes.
And for meeting with us before. It's not like you just showed up and just started talking, you know. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and we'll try to share this widely, and if we get any more questions, we would love to, share your contact information and get you out there, as you seem to be some of the glue in the district, and we'd like to get you sticky on some others. So this is great. What are next steps? When we have a December event coming up. Does anybody have that date and time and that topic real quick?
I might. Let me see.
I don't have the December date on me.
I think I did a
14th maybe.
Did we confirm that was going to work with the OTPT as well?
I believe so.
So then that would be the day, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. 14th, 7 to 8.
Awesome. And that'll be with the OTPT staff. Great.
Yes.
So, Sarah, I'm going to take responsibility for letting you know when this presentation that's been recorded is available for other parents.